Carol Roth, the War on Small Business author and former recovering investment banker that actually can break things down and talk and explain what things mean to the regular schlubs of America. Welcome, Carol. How are you?
Just enjoying the Biden economy. How are you?
Oh, my gosh. That party yesterday was absolutely incredible. Incredible. I mean, it was surreal. They were celebrating that the interest rate is coming down. Can you explain what happened with the interest rate numbers, the CPI numbers?
All right, well, James Taylor was there. So we've seen fire and we've seen rain.
Yeah.
And we saw a very hot CPI report as well yesterday. As we know, the CPI is one of the measures of inflation. It measures sort of the consumer inflation. We do know that it's understated because they have messed with it for the last, several decades to underplay it, but it's still a benchmark that we use to sort of compare. It was considered hot by all expectations. We knew there was going to be some decline in the headline number because of the sharp decline in gasoline prices.
Wait. But could you explain why the price of gasoline is going down?
Sure. So before we get to the nitty gritty, there are a couple of reasons why gasoline is coming down. Some of it was our president pulling a little bit of a stunt and pulling oil out of our emergency reserves and putting it out into the market to kind of depress it. Some of it was artificial because the gas taxes have been on hiatus in certain locales. But the biggest reason that the gasoline prices are coming down is because the price of oil is coming down. And the biggest reason the price of oil is coming down is because the price of oil got too high. It was just pure demand destruction. There's this saying in the commodities market that the best cure for high prices is high prices. And that's what we saw, not only here in the United States, where people maybe decided not to take a road trip or to reroute their lives, so that they're not using as much energy and particularly gasoline, but also on a global stage. Obviously, the prices are going through the roof, as we know, in Europe, completely self-inflicted. But, again, they're having to make those same choices. And then China, as we've discussed previously, is having its own issues, and particularly with parts of that country being under lockdown and being a top consumer of oil, they weren't using it. So the demand destruction is that reason, that big reason that we had the decrease in oil and then the decrease in gasoline.
Just confirm that this is a good way to look at the words demand destruction, because you'll hear people say, well, what we're looking for is some demand destruction in the oil prices and blah, blah, blah. And, that just kind of goes over people's heads. And I described it today. Every time you hear demand destruction, think, put your name. So Carol Roth, your bank account at, let's say, Bank of America. What we're really looking for is Carol Roth's bank account at Bank of America to be destroyed. So you don't have the money to go and buy the things, correct? They're looking to price things so crazy that you can't afford it.
Yeah, it's the outgrowth of high prices that basically Carol Roth says, I'm looking at my bank account. It's being destroyed, and there's no way that I can go on that road trip.
Yeah.
So I'm just not going to be one of those people in the market who is purchasing gasoline this month. I'm going to take a reprieve. I'm going to work from home. And that's part of the whole story of the Federal Reserve, what they're trying to do to quote unquote slow down the economy and engineer their another big kind of financial speak, a soft landing, trying to quell inflation without tanking the economy. And that's their toolkit is all about demand destruction.
Correct.
They don't want the consumer to purchase. They don't want businesses to make investments. And we've already had 2 quarters of negative growth. So if they're trying to get the economy to slow down, you know what that means? That means more contraction.
Okay, so that's why gas is going down. And that was really the only thing that went down, right? We had food prices skyrocketed.
Yeah, it's crazy. I saw a stat that they put in there that food in the house, it was something like they were at the highest level since the late 1970s, 79, I think. So we got, hot numbers in food, in shelter, in medical care services. This isn't like ancillary stuff. This isn't like, the fancy
This is core.
clothes, right? This is the stuff that you need to be able to live your life. And it was the fact that we thought maybe that the lower energy prices would flow through, no pun intended, a little bit more of the economy. But it's just shown that we have a very broad base in terms of inflation. It's not just coming from that one pocket. It's not just Putin's fault, Glenn.
Right.
And that is going to take a long time to come back down to normalized levels.
So we have something else to add on top of it, and you can call it climate change or just a bad season or whatever. But I was talking to my aunt, who's like 85 years old yesterday. Quite a conversation. I said, anyway, she was canning yesterday, and she was like, there have been no peaches, no beans. She said, we planted our bean garden 3 times. We had a hard time finding even seeds for it. We are facing a real crisis just because the crops didn't come through. And that's happening globally. You add to that all of the other problems we haven't seen. We're now just about to get into the time where we would be using this summer's crops, correct?
Yeah.
So food prices still have a long way to go in the up direction, don't they?
They do. And that's part of the issue, why I'm sort of banging my head against the wall in terms of a lot of these discussion points, because as we talked about the demand destruction that the Fed policy is trying to enact, our issue is the broad-based supply issue. And as you mentioned, one of the areas that is undersupplied is food. Part of that, as you mentioned, because of weather events, some of that because of fertilizer shortages, some of it because of byproducts from energy that go into drying grains, some of that because of war in Ukraine. But all of these things happening at the same time are creating those shortages. And again, as the consumer decides what's to substitute, they may be able to substitute to a lower cost food, but they can't substitute food. And that is going to continue to be an issue all across the globe.
Well, they can't eat bugs. I mean, they're supposed to be very, very tasty. Okay, hang on just a second. I want to ask you a couple of things about the Fed and what they're planning on doing, and I'm reading some disturbing things that I would just like, talk me down from the tree if you can. We'll do that in just 60 seconds. So, a couple of things. Let me start with the Fed. I'm reading now that the Fed is going to raise the rates again, but as astonishing as it seems to me that we're at these, historically speaking, low rates, and it's going to stop the heart of the economy. They're saying now the next rate hike or two could just put us into a tailspin. Do you believe that?
I do. If you go back to Janet Yellen, our quote unquote esteemed Treasury Secretary, the one who told us that inflation was going to be transitory and that they needed to get information on $600 e-commerce transactions to keep the billionaires in check, Glenn. She was on one of those weekend shows, and she said basically that the Fed is going to need a great deal of skill and also some luck to achieve this soft landing, trying to bring down inflation without taking the economy. Well, we know on the skill side, we know that they don't have the skills. They were behind the curve in terms of raising the rates to begin with. They waited till we were at, historic 40-year highs before they even started thinking about reversing course. So obviously, we know that's probably not, the skill part of it. The luck part of it isn't on our side either, because they don't have the right tool set. As we've been talking about this, supply side versus demand side and the demand destruction, their tool set in terms of raising the target interest rate, as well as potentially reducing the assets on their balance sheet, although I don't know that they're ever going to get around to that. that again is to destroy demand. It's to have the consumer slow purchases. It's to have businesses slow investments. First, they have the government that's working, against them on that. The government policy is spending more. So those two things are at odds, which makes absolutely no sense. But the problem we have now isn't a demand side issue. It's a supply side issue. As we've been talking about, we have broad undersupply. So unless the Fed knows how to print labor, print food, print oil, print housing, they are not going to be able to solve for that delta, that distance between supply and demand without completely slowing the economy to the point that we are in a severe recession. And that is what the market is signaling. Both the stock market and the bond market right now is saying, boy, we don't have the confidence that the Fed not only has the tools, but that they aren't going to put us in a worse situation. And on top of that, then you also have the global economy, in tatters as well, which isn't not a lot of luck. So I'm not real bullish on the skill and luck of the Fed right now.
So I was in Italy last week and just talked to people. You sit at a restaurant or whatever, and we just talked to people. And one of the more disturbing trends that I heard was, that things are getting really bad. And one person described it to me as the winds of revolution are sweeping Europe. Because it's fascinating. Everyone knew it was the same problem we have here. The elites are going in one direction and the people are going in another. The people are saying, give it back to us. And the elites are saying, give it all to us. And that's not going to last. And I kept hearing things like, we're just going to have to learn to that the glory days of having things that you wanted and easy lives are over. Can you describe what that means? That Americans are just going to have to live a different kind of life?
Yeah, it's so frustrating that we have the leading economy in the world, and you have all of these first world countries that really have spent time using their technology to help other countries and to help lift up human flourishing around the globe. If you think about China and what we've done in terms of the extreme poverty there, lifting out 90% of their population from extreme poverty because they were able to trade with us and basically suck up some of our capitalism into their communist system. That's what we should be doing. We should be taking that leadership, saying that we know how to do things the best way and we're going to help everybody flourish. Instead, you have these elites saying, no, we want this to be a third world country, and we want to be in a dictatorship where us at the top have our own set of rules and have all the power, and you just suffer and you're going to have to suck it up. And, unfortunately, there are some people who will go along with that and go, yeah, crisis, we must do this. We're all in this together, kind of like what happened in COVID. But we should have learned over the last 2 years that they don't have our best outcomes at heart, and that they will do anything, lie, completely do anything they can to get and usurp that power. And we've already seen, smaller amounts of civil unrest in developed countries, whether it was the Freedom Convoy or in the Netherlands with the farmers. And, you're right that this could end up becoming a much bigger issue, which, if it changes the tide, it, in a sense, may not be the worst outcome. Not that obviously I ever want to see, any sort of violence or unrest, but we need to change the tenor, and the people need to take back common sense and sanity here.
So the one thing that kind of makes sense to me is, if you're somebody who wants control of things, you need to control medicine. They do. They need to control education. They do. But they need to control energy. I'm seeing this happening in Europe because they're ahead of us, and people are going to freeze to death this winter. They will freeze to death, and people won't be able to pay their power bill, which will put the energy companies into distress, and they won't have the money to do it because people aren't paying their bills, et cetera, et cetera. And I just think the government will step in and say they couldn't get it done. This needs to be done by the government. And you could see the West just taking and absorbing all of our energy companies. Do you think that's a possibility? Because I think it's likely, at least in Europe.
I mean, so if you think about the desire to nationalize, control, have sort of a public-private partnership, at least in the U.S., California is sort of our incubator for that, and they're starting to test that in a lot of different grounds. They just put forth that Fast Recovery Act, which is going to be a state council on fast food. So they are going to manage the fast food industry. And again, that is a step to try to nationalize these industries. I definitely see a place. We've already been hearing from the US and abroad about things like price caps. We have a big problem in Europe in terms of the way they have kind of financed themselves in a potential collapse of some of the energy companies and utilities out there.
Yep.
So yes, you're going to have the governments come in with a bailout, and then that may use that as an excuse. Well, we're bailing them out anyway. They can't manage this. We need to take this over. So whether it's food, whether it's energy, whether it's any aspect of our economic freedom, these crises are their touch points. And again, self-inflicted crises, the ones that they created, in order to say, we created the problem, but don't look at that. We're going to fix it for you.
Carol, will you do me a favor? I'd like to do a special with just a group of experts that can tell the average person what's coming and how do we deal with it. I mean, it's so overwhelming to the average person, and I don't think, because people make it so complex, because it is complex. But they make it so complex that they don't even think about breaking it down into smaller bite sizes that people can understand. So can you find a bunch of people that you really think get it, that maybe could sit around in a round table and we could have a conversation about all this?
I would love to. I'd be honored to, and I will be in touch.
Okay, good. Thank you. Carol, we'll talk again. Carol Roth, make sure that you're following her. She is really, really spot on. You can find her at carolroth.com. Also, tonight is a special on the energy crisis and the collapse that is coming for Europe and what it means to America. Not just the explanation, but what we need to do about it. That's tonight, blazetv.com.